Okay, so congratulations guys, you've made it to the end of our tutorial here, and this was a tutorial mostly on switch and switch statements and while loops. So I'm just going to give a brief summary of what we've covered so far. So while loops look a little like this. We have some kind of a condition and the code to run. So we basically run this loop, little like a for in loop, until this condition is met. And once this condition is met, then we exit the loop and no longer execute this code. So we could have something like, if we had some kind of variable I, then we could say we'll run until I is less than 5, or rather we'll run while I is less than 5. So this means we run until I is no longer less than 5. Okay, and then we'll just say, you know, let's have some other variable. It's called count 0, and we'll just have count plus equals 1, and then if we print out, and then we should also have I plus equals 1, and then we could just print out count, and that should only be equal to 5, and it's just going to be running a little slowly, and there we go, count is equal to 5. That's because this loop runs 5 times. So we started off with I is 0, and it executes this code, so adds 1 to I, adds 1 to count, and then so I is equal to 1, and then it runs again, then I is 2, it runs again, then 3, then 4, then I is equal to 5, and now this condition is no longer met because I is no longer less than 5 if it's 5, so we exit the loop. Okay, so that's how while loops work. Great way to create a loop to kind of execute the same code many times if we don't necessarily know the boundaries. So with for in loops, we know that we have to run a specific number of times from the start value to the end value, and we know we're always going to run that many times unless we have a break statement. Whereas with while loops, it's kind of allows us to run, you know, potentially infinitely, as long as this condition is not met, or rather as long as this condition is met. So as long as, in this case, I is less than 5, the loop will keep running. The only problem with while loops, however, is we get kind of stuck in, we can get stuck in this infinite loop if we're not careful. Okay, so we need to just make sure that at some point the loop will exit, okay, whether through break statements or returns, or just kind of making sure that this condition will eventually be met, because otherwise these infinite loops can break your code. So that's a problem with while loops, but otherwise they give you a lot more flexibility than for in loops do. And so yeah, each has their use. You'll see while loops a lot in video games. So we talked about switch statements, and actually we did that before while loops, but that's fine. So switch statements look like this. So we have some kind of value to test against, usually a variable, and then with each case we have the possible value that that variable could take on. Okay, so I'm just going to close this log up and we can ignore this error. So let's just say we have this value, and I'm just going to comment out this while loop. Yes, let's say we have a value I, and then we have a bunch of cases. So we could have case I equals 0, and then code to run we could have count equals, I don't know, we can have count equals 0, and then let's have just another case, and let's see if I equals 1, and let's just have count equal 1 then, and otherwise count equals 2. Okay, and then if we print out the value of count, we should get count equal to 0. And that's exactly right, because we're testing to see what the value of I is. I is equal to 0 to start off with. So we compare each of these cases to what the value of I is right now. So the first case is if I equals 0, and if that's true, then we'll do count equals 0 and break, so we'll leave the loop. If it's not, then we'll test to see if count is equal, or if I is equal to 1. Then we'll set count equal to 1, and the default is just kind of like otherwise. If all of these other cases fail, then we'll do this. Okay, so again, a little like an if, else if, and then an else statement. And it's easy to compare and switch between the two, but just bear in mind that switch statements are only testing the equality of this variable. So again, a little more restrictive than if statements, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. That kind of, I think it looks a little neater than the if statement, and is easier and faster to type as well. And the last three things we talked about were the continue. So continue, we talked about break, and return statements. So the continue statement forces the loop to kind of ignore whatever code is after the continue and just move right on to the next iteration. So particularly useful in for-in loops or while loops. Break statements allow us to exit the form of control flow we're in, so it allows us to exit a loop or an if statement or something if a certain condition is met. So let's say we want to exit a loop prematurely, then we can use these break statements to do that. And return statements are very similar to break statements, just with functions. So whereas break statements only exit out of a control flow, the return statement exits out of the entire function. So it just causes the function to stop executing any code and just exit. Okay, so that's continue, break, and return statements. We looked at switch statements and while loops. Right, so that's the end of this tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed it and learned a lot. Again, if you're still confused, I suggest you, other than going back and watching this video, you could also check out the videos on for-in loops, so you can kind of compare while loops to for-in loops, and compare switch statements to if statements. Okay, because while loops are similar to for-in loops, and switch statements are very similar to if and else statements. Okay, so go ahead and check those out. Otherwise, just kind of play around with these a little bit. Think about in video games when you play them where we might see while loops, what the code might kind of look like, and whether or not we'd see kind of these switch statements as well. Alright, well thank you very much for watching again. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and check out our other tutorials. Hopefully we will see you on those next tutorials.